Hey, welcome to another episode of To Be the Church. This is Tyler, and if you were with us a couple weeks ago, you know that we started a quick little summer series talking to a lot of the authors that we recommend on this podcast, and today is our next installment in that. Today we have Jay Kim. He wrote the book Analog Church, Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age, and so we're going to talk to him about the digital age and what that creates in people, and coming off of a year where a lot of us consumed church content online only, where do we go from here? And what does that look like? And so we're going to jump right in. There's a link to Jay's book as well as his website and social media in the show notes or in the YouTube description. And so let's jump right in with our interview with Jay Kim. All right, well, we're here with Jay Kim, and he is the author of Analog Church, Why We Need Real People, Places, and Things in the Digital Age. And Jay, could you tell us just a bit about your weekly ministry context? Because you're a pastor down in California, correct?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Tyler.
Yeah.
Super pumped to talk to you. I live and serve in ministry in San Jose, California, which is kind of right in the heart of Silicon Valley in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I serve on staff at a church called Westgate Church here in the Silicon Valley, sort of a classic multi-site church. And then I'm also connected to a church where I was on staff full time, but now I serve as sort of a teacher in residence at a church called Vintage Faith Church in Santa Cruz. So spend most of my time, at Westgate helping lead and teach here, and then go over and teach a little bit in Santa Cruz from time to time as well. So that's kind of the short of it.
Cool. Well, I was first introduced to your work by a little conference that happened at Western Seminary here in Portland last year. And I don't know how much, Gary Brashears, who was over this conference, I don't know how much he told you about day one of the conference, because you kind of came in on day two. In day one, we spent at one of the bigger churches in our area where they were showing us all of their online church equipment and kind of how they do their online church campus and how they have people from all over the world who are members of this online church campus. And they kind of just were showing us the ins and outs of that. And then day two, we walk in and you're there to tell us why the church needs to be in person. And so it was extremely fascinating. Here in our church context, we've had a live stream for about 5 years, but we have been very clear from day one, this is not a church campus. This is not a substitute for gathering in person with the body. This is a supplement when it's necessary and when it's needed. And so a lot of our language comes out of hey, we hope that you're here next week, but if you can't be blah, 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 whatever. And so it was a very fascinating conference. And then the timing of the conference couldn't have been more odd either. I actually went back and checked, and that conference happened less than 3 weeks before the entire U.S. shut down from COVID.
That's right.
So that was the last weekend of February, early March, and then, mid-March of 2020 was when on a Thursday afternoon, our church, I imagine your church as well, had to be we can't meet this Sunday. And so that conversation became far more fascinating even, in the wake of the church being forced to not meet in person for a while. And so let's though talk about, let's start with the subtitle. Why do we need real people, places, and things in the digital age? And so, in the book, you lay out a few things that the digital age values. And so, could we start there? What are those values of the digital age that we are living in today?
Sure. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I would suggest that the digital age is propped up by three key values, as you mentioned. I think those values are speed, choice, and individualism. And I don't think I have to explain a whole lot. I mean, just as I say the words, I think most people, when they think about their sort of digital online experiences and interactions, can relate, to the fact that speed is a high value. I mean, I still remember the days of dial-up internet. That's, when I was in high school, we got dial-up internet. And if my mom jumped on the phone, I would lose internet connection and get super upset. But even still, I thought it was like magic. I was like, man, this is incredible. I could go to ESPN.com and catch all the scores, and there's pictures and all this kind of stuff. And And now if you went to a coffee shop and you're like, hey, what's the Wi-Fi? And they're like, oh, we only have dial-up here. You would think the coffee shop was like barbaric or something, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that's just,
No lie.
it's just
This morning I went to a coffee shop. The internet was slow enough that they left and went down the street to another coffee shop, and it was
yeah.
significantly faster than dial-up was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm guilty of the same thing. I'm guilty of the same thing. So speed is a choice, or speed is a critical value of the digital age. Everything has to get faster and faster. And what we know is, like, we're on a weird treadmill here. Like, what we feel like is really fast internet connection right now, or like really fast in terms of how our smartphones work or whatever. It's like we know for a fact in 2 years we're going to look back at these speeds and go, that's so archaic.
Mm.
Like, how did we ever survive on 7G or whatever? And speed. And then you have choice. I mean, just come on, Amazon. You can go to Amazon and type anything, blue striped socks, and you'll have page after page after page of endless options. I mean, choice, the ever growing sort of expansive nature of choices in the digital age is critically important. And then individualism. I mean, the reality is our digital experiences are curated for our individual personalities and preferences. That's undeniable. I mean, that's been proven. Just, and it's not even like we're doing the curating. I mean, machine algorithms are curating our digital experiences. So when you scroll, you're not seeing just a random amalgamation of things. You're seeing a very carefully curated sort of list, or visual gallery of things that are designed to pique your particular interests. So there you go. Those are the values. And I think one of the arguments I make in the book is that those values, like any value, any set of values, when they go unchecked for long enough and are pushed to their extreme, values can turn really vicious. They can turn in on themselves and do some great harm. And I think that's the case in the digital age for many of us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Are you familiar at all with Brett McCracken's book, The Wisdom Pyramid?
Yeah, man. Brett's a good friend, and I had a chance to endorse that book and
Oh, okay.
read it early, and it's killer. I love it. I
Nice.
love it. Yeah.
So, listeners of this podcast, you may remember just a couple of weeks ago we had Brett on to talk Wisdom Pyramid,
Oh,
and he
nice.
talks,
Yeah.
about the sickness that we have, and makes the analogy of the food guide pyramid there, and then how the three things that we are right now is we are consuming information too fast, speed.
Yeah.
We are consuming too much information, and then we are choosing our own diets. That choice and individualism there.
Yeah.
And so in Brett's work, he kind of takes it and talks about how how do we intake knowledge to create wisdom, and uses that food guide pyramid. But what you do is really interesting, because you take those values and, like you said, they can create some pretty vicious things. And so what do you see as being created? Like, what is
Yeah.
happening whenever we live in a world of perpetual speed, choice, and individualism?
Yep. Yeah. I think the speed is making us intensely impatient. I think all of the choices are making us hyper shallow. And then I think all the individualism is making us really, really isolated. So, speed leading to impatience is not rocket science. It's pretty obvious. I mean, you just shared the same, sort of embarrassing experience I've had many times in my life, where it's like, oh, the free Wi-Fi at this cafe is way too slow for me. So I'm gonna move on to the next. And then, there's good reason for that. I get it, but it's sort of it's a window into the reality that is our growing impatience in the speed of the digital age. And then, choices. I mean, if you know that there's a plethora of options out there, the moment something doesn't suit you just right, it becomes so easy to move on to the next thing. One of the really sort of like critically dangerous ways in which this plays out is web apps like Tinder, for
Mm.
example. I have friends who are single who are on Tinder, and I've seen them kind of like swipe left, swipe right, and I'm just like, dude, what in the world? Like, how is that even a thing? These are like real human beings, and you're making these quick judgment calls based on the shallowest of clues, the flimsiest, shallowest of clues that you could possibly imagine. And that's just what happens when you know that the moment you swipe, there's just going to be another face staring staring you right in the eyes, and you can make another judgment call there, and then you could do it endlessly. And so it's making us incredibly shallow, and the individualism is making us really isolated. I mean, if your entire experience is just curated to your preferences and your personality, you kind of box yourself into this kind of lonely world of your own making, um, this kind of strange bubble in which you live that is all just sort of a little mini world that orbits around you, orbits around your preferences and your personality. And all the data seems to be bearing that out, that even though the internet promised to make us a global village, where we're constantly always interconnected with one another, the reality is people are lonelier than ever in the digital age. Even though we have more means of, pseudo connecting online than we've ever had before, simultaneously we're lonelier than ever. And that's not accidental. The individualism is making us really isolated. So that's, I think, what can happen when the values turn vicious. And sadly, I think that is what is happening to many, if not most of us in the digital age.
Okay, so the speed, choice, and individualism leads us to impatience, shallowness, and isolation. And in the book, you talk about how those three things are counter to what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. And so you talk in the book about, that as followers of Christ, we need patience, depth, and community, right? That these are all things that we need that the digital age can't provide. And so what would you say to the person, or to maybe the church leader who says, we need to fully embrace the digital age because that is where we are at. This is a gospel opportunity, and we just need to run full force into that gospel opportunity and embrace where our culture is at and meet them there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is I don't think it's monolithic one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I wrote a book called Analog Church, arguing for embodied presence, and I still, at the core of me, I still hold true to that. I would, and I think I say this in the book, I'm not anti-digital. I'm not arguing for people to become Amish and to throw away their phones and churn their own butter, even if that's what you want to do. That's awesome. There's some beauty in that, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to pit analog versus digital. I think it has more to do with a hierarchy. We don't like that word, but I think when it comes to digital experiences versus embodied experiences, it's an appropriate word. I think that there needs to be a hierarchy of order in terms of what we prioritize. So that's really the ultimate argument I would make. If somebody says, we need to embrace the digital future and go all digital, then I understand the sentiment behind that. I even understand kind of like that those phrases we hear a lot by some church leaders, national church leaders sometimes, like, this is the greatest gospel opportunity God has ever provided us. First of all, I would disagree in that I don't know how you would know that. Like, I don't know how any of us would know what the greatest gospel opportunity. If what you mean is we have more tools at our disposal to share the good news of Jesus and inform people with the right information, then I would agree. Yeah, we do have that. So if that's what you mean by the greatest gospel opportunity, then sure, fine, we have that. But I would actually suggest that the calling, the biblical invitation, is not simply the exchange of the right information, but rather an invitation into a life of transformation, an invitation into a life of not just knowing, but following. right? That Jesus doesn't really use the word Christian. That word is found, you can count on one hand how many times you find that word in the New Testament. But what you find in the New Testament over and over again is the word disciple, right? Or a student or an apprentice, one who essentially learns the way of his or her master by living in close proximity to his or her master, by essentially, in the words of the Jewish rabbis, allowing the dust of their rabbi to rub off on them, to be covered in their dust, like to walk so closely in literal close proximity with their teacher that they sort of learn by embodied proximity, right? That's the language the Bible uses in terms of the invitation for people. So the Great Commission that everybody knows, Jesus' final words to his followers in Matthew 28, he says, go and make disciples, apprentices, students of all nations. So if that's true, then I would argue the hierarchy of analog over digital matters, because while digital can inform us, give us the right information, whether it's the good news of the gospel or something else, what digital fails to do, at least adequately, is transform us. I think transformation demands apprenticeship, embodied, shoulder to shoulder, in person, as much as possible experiences. It's one of the reasons why my wife can do all the exercises she wants to do by watching YouTube videos for free, but she pays a gym membership to go to a gym and the gym is like starting to slowly open up now. So she's like paying her membership again to go to a gym, to be in this sweaty place with other human beings and an instructor who's like yelling in her face. And, why does she do that? I mean, she can get the same exercises, just do them at home by herself. There's something, she would tell you, there's something motivating, inspiring, and in her words, she would say transformative about the experience of being in the same space with others, putting the work in together. And so it is with the church, I think, so digital is here to stay. I do think our future is hybrid, and I would not have said that pre-pandemic. I certainly didn't say it in my book, but I would say post-pandemic world, like digital is here to stay for a variety of reasons. Some of them for the common good, some of them because people are not going to feel safe to come back and whatever. But I think digital is here to stay, at least in its most appropriate. It's here to stay, not as a convenience, but as a sort of concession. It's not ideal, and there is a hierarchy. Analog in person is always what we're aiming for, but we get it. If for a variety of reasons you can't show up in person, then at least you have digital. But the ultimate goal is that you do life with others shoulder to shoulder. I think that's what's required of us in terms of what it means to follow Jesus, to be a disciple. So I said a lot there, but those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah. So you said that when we're together, kind of the goal of the church is transformation, right? To be transformed. And in the book, you say that in a lot of ways, the digital age is an age of unformation. It is, and so what do you mean by that? Like, what is unformational as it relates to transformational?
Yeah. Well, I think technology by its nature, throughout human history, makes a particular sort of exchange. So not always, but almost always, technological advancements offer us, they offer us convenience or comfort in exchange for our formation. So we become unformed, or worse yet, deformed in some ways, as technology offers us convenience and comfort. So take transportation technology, for instance. Like 5,500 years ago, the only transportation technology that was known to man, they think, were the 2 feet below you, right? That was the only way you got from point A to point B. And then somebody looked out on a field, they think in modern day Kazakhstan, and they saw a wild horse, and they thought to themselves, if I jump on the back of that wild beast, I bet I could get from point A to point B faster than I can with my own 2 feet. And so somebody did that for the first time. giant leap forward in terms of transportation technology. Now, if you think about riding a horse, it takes immense amounts of strength and skill to do that. You fast forward to like the late 19th century, and the German engineer Carl Benz, he creates like the first commercially viable automobile. And if you ever look at a photo of it, it's like this giant hunk of metal. And it's just like it's a machine, and it's all manual, and you have to like crank on the gears to turn anything. It's like, so to drive the first automobile, it required still a lot of strength and skill, but a little less strength and skill than riding a wild horse. And then you fast forward to like the 1920s and 30s, and Chrysler and Oldsmobile, they put out like the first automatic transmission cars, right? So now you no longer have to shift the gears like manually. The car just does it for you. This is a technological advancement. Essentially, driving becomes more comfortable, becomes more convenient, but it demands less strength and skill from you. Like, you don't have to know how to drive manually anymore. The car will just do it. So more convenience, more comfort in exchange for strength and skill. You're becoming unformed in terms of like your bodily engagement in the act of driving. And then you see where this is going. Like, you get into a Tesla today and you hardly have to drive. Like, you just push a few buttons and then it's like, oh, it just takes you where you want to go. When my kids, who are 6 and 3, when they're driving age, they might not drive. Like, they might not get driver's license. I don't know. Like, they might just be like, Dad, why would I drive? Our cars drive themselves. I mean, it feels like that's where it's going. They're just gonna like get in the car and say, take me to school, Siri, and then the car will just take them. So tons of comfort and convenience, but like no strength, no skill. Like, they're not forming any of that. Like, they're not going to know. I mean, they very well may not ever learn how to drive. Now, that kind of stuff is fine when it comes to driving. In fact, like, the data shows it might actually make our roads safer. So that's fine. That's great. But that's really problematic when it comes to discipleship to Jesus, because following Jesus it's not intended to be comfortable or convenient. It's by its nature intended to be like, carry your cross and follow me. It's the effort and the struggle that forms and transforms us. And so when we relegate our discipleship to Jesus to technology, which by its nature wants to make things comfortable and convenient, we have to be aware that's unforming some stuff in us. So when you think about church as an hour-long service you watch on your television at home, that's really comfortable and convenient. You don't have to get your kids ready. You can just watch in your PJs with your bowl of cereal if you want to, whatever. Super convenient, super comfortable. But be aware that is doing unformational or deformational work in you. That comfort and convenience comes at a cost. You are not being shaped and formed and transformed through effort into the sort of person God has called you to be. There's that famous Dallas Willard quote: grace is opposed to earning, but it's not opposed to effort. And I believe that to be imminently true. And so I think there's a danger when we relegate our discipleship to Jesus to technology, because technology is interested in making discipleship comfortable and convenient. But real discipleship that's going to transform us can't be comfortable and convenient. It has to be effortful work. And I think we have to be thoughtful about that when it comes to how we leverage technology.
Yeah, so when I was originally introduced to your work back in February of 2020, I would have said, I totally agree, and this is an uphill battle, like in convincing people of the importance of being together in person. And now, as we sit June 2021, where we just had a year where pretty much every church on the planet had some sort of online option or online presence, when that number was like relatively low comparatively a year ago. It seems like that uphill battle just became a mountain. As church leaders, can we help people re-engage? How can we convince them of the transformational work that happens when we're together, now that some of our folks I'm a local church pastor. I have close friends who are like, yeah, we just watch online. It's just easier on our stage of life. How do we engage those folks and invite them into transformation as opposed to the unformation, or hopefully not deformation, that's happening?
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's a great question. This is something I think I'm still sort of wrestling with and thinking about. But I just heard something that sort of shifted my paradigm here. So these are like not completely formed thoughts that I'm just going to kind of, put out there on this podcast. So I don't even know if I totally believe this yet, but it's something that's like rumbling around in my head and in my heart. So I'll just kind of share it. My entire ministry life, I've always kind of bought into the funnel of ministry idea. So there's lots of different versions of this, right? Like there's the concentric circle version that I think Rick Warren at Saddleback made famous, which is like you have your core, and then you're committed, and then your congregation, and then your community, or something like that, in terms of levels or layers of their sort of connection or commitment to your community. And then again, there's like a funnel version of that, lots of different versions. But the goal in my mind, what I was told and what I was taught in my almost 20 years of local church life, is that the goal is to move people through those concentric circles, or to move them down the funnel to the point where they become like the most core, sort of bought in, all in, serving, giving, totally living on mission, loving the Lord, like that sort of thing. And I just recently heard from someone, a church leader, a well-respected church leader whose name I think most people would know if I said it here. But I was in a little meeting with him, and he said something that like blew my mind. He said that at their church, they've actually blown up the concentric circle funnel philosophy post-COVID. And actually, the way they're thinking about it now is, rather than concentric circles or a funnel, they just think about these different categories of people as separate sort of like rooms in a house or something. And they all live in the same house, but the goal is not to like move you necessarily from the dining room to the living room to the bedroom. The goal is just to identify which room you're living in, and to give you what you're longing for or looking for there peripherally for most rooms, while focusing the most transformative energy on one particular room. So what he meant was, what we're going to do post-pandemic, yes, we have online stuff. Yes, we have whatever, in-person services. But what we're going to do is just focus our energies on our core, committed. We're just going to go all in with them, pour into them, motivate, inspire, equip them. And then everybody else that just wants to watch online or whatever, it's like they're already getting that. Like, we're already creating the thing they kind of want anyways. So rather than putting inordinate amounts of energy on the person that's like, I'm just going to watch online, and trying to figure out all sorts of creative ways to like come back to church, we're doing this or we're doing that, and funnel them through the process. Instead, we're just going to like really pour into those who are super committed, and everybody else, if they want to watch, that's great. We hope it's a blessing to you. But our mission right now is just to pour into this group that's like really committed with us. And it reminds me a lot of like what Mark Sayers in Australia has been saying quite a bit lately as well. Sort of a similar thought, like we've lost all of our nominal attenders, our marginal attenders who are just casually attending, and we're just relaunching by pouring into those who he calls like those who want to rebuild, and build together moving forward. And we're in the same boat. We just had a meeting like a month ago at our church for those who are in that core group. We just asked them, like, if you consider Westgate, like you consider yourself part of our mission, come join us. And there's like 300 people, 350 who came out on a Sunday afternoon. It was like such a blessing. And that's, a fraction of the size of our church or whatever. But man, that's it. Those are the people that we're like, man, we're with you in this, and we're just going to go. We're going to go for it all the way. And everyone else who happens to come along, great. So That might not be the most encouraging or most practically helpful, but that's kind of our approach at this point.
Okay, so last question on this. Let's say you end up at a barbecue next month, 4th of July or whenever, time doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But let's say you end up at a barbecue and you run into somebody who maybe falls into that nominal category.
Yeah.
And they tell you, "Hey, I'm just like super happy where I'm at right now. Like I'm feeling totally fine, just they probably wouldn't use these words, but I'm totally fine just consuming the content that the church is producing. And I
Yeah.
feel like my relationship with God is doing all right. Like it's just fine. How do you counsel them? What would you say to them as it relates to? And let's say like COVID's not the issue. Let's say that like they're not high risk. They're not. It's not even about a comfort level with COVID. It's more just
Yeah.
about the convenient aspect of what they found over this last year.
Yeah.
How would you urge them? What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were just talking about this with our staff earlier today. I was telling our staff, you know, I understand that there's sort of an urgency to, we were talking about like, volunteers, getting people to serve. And I was telling them, I understand right now you've got spots to fill. So you feel like the tyranny of the urgent, like you've got to recruit people. And I told them today, I was like, man, don't recruit. Let's just take the edge off right now. Don't recruit a single person. What I'd like you to do is embody the ethos of a storyteller. Just tell stories. Just like anytime you meet with someone, interact with someone in our church, don't think to yourself, I've got to recruit them to serve in my ministry. Think to yourself, I just got to tell them the story of what I see God up to here, and leave the rest to God. So I think I would take the same approach. If somebody's saying like, "Hey, man, I think I'm doing okay with God, and I'm perfectly happy just consuming the content," there's a million things I'd like to say about how consuming content is actually not formative or transformative in the way that you might think it is. It can trick you into thinking that you are, but it's actually like getting back to Brett McCracken's wisdom pyramid. It's like a totally imbalanced diet. It's like just eating bread. Like information content is one part of a larger, much more a whole meal. You need much more than that. You can't just have the information. You need practice and experience and people and so much more. So I'd be tempted to say all that. And if the opportunity arose, if the person asked the question, I would certainly share all of that. And I would share it freely, but with, grace and kindness and all those things. But I think primarily what I would do is just tell the story. Say, man, yeah, I get it. If that's kind of how you feel, no hard feelings. We miss you. But man, here's what I'm seeing in the people who are showing up. Here's how I'm seeing hearts and minds come alive after a year in lockdown, alone and isolated. Here are the stories that are pouring out of church, like literally church, when people are getting together on Sundays, like tears in their eyes. And, it's an incredible thing. And if and when you're willing or able or desiring, we'd love to see you there. We'd love to have you. I just think it's different. And, in the most beautiful ways. So I think that's what I would do. Probably just lean into storyteller rather than recruiter. I don't, again, I don't know how helpful or unhelpful this might be to some of your listeners. So if it's unhelpful, just throw it away. I'm still trying to navigate this myself. I think that's just where I am right now. I'm not interested in recruiting people or trying to convince them to do a particular thing. What I'm interested in is telling a good story and focusing a lot on those who are here and really wanting to be here. I think that, and it's exciting. I think there's like a baseline sort of a community of people who are so all in right now that it gives us a beautiful opportunity to dream big and see what God has for us in the months and years to come.
And maybe this would just be for me, but I look forward to your follow up on this once you've figured out all this stuff here post pandemic here. But thanks so much for being with us. We'll put a link to the book in the show notes. If any of our listeners want to follow your work, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Tyler. The best place is probably my I have a website. It's just jkimthinks.com. It doesn't mean I'm the only one who thinks. It just means these are the things I'm thinking about. So jkimthinks.com, and that's my handle on social media too: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, all that stuff. So just jkimthinks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll talk soon.